50,000 Indian Americans, in addition to several right-wingers, with the inclusion of Donald Trump in this, attended an event called the Howdy Modi event. This Howdy Modi event, of course, is taking place in the context of headliner Modi, who unilaterally revoked autonomy in the region of Kashmir, not to mention the disappearances of various people in Kashmir, be it business leaders, activists, political leaders, anybody that will, I would imagine, pose and complain in any way that has a following, has been disappeared. India media, for the most part, has ignored this, but Modi has essentially arrested these people, disappeared, and flooded the region with military after the revocation of the autonomy, not to mention what is considered to be human rights abuses and eliminating press, internet coverage, all of that stuff. Meaning they've essentially turned it into somewhat of a black hole where it's unclear what is taking place there, and there have been talk about human rights abuses occurring in Kashmir. All of this was as a result of Modi. Now, from the standpoint of the right, Donald Trump doesn't really care about this stuff, so Donald Trump doesn't really matter to Donald Trump. However, from the standpoint of the left, it does matter. Sanders doesn't miss the opportunity to slam Trump for his association with Modi, making the point that if you're welcoming Modi to this country, human rights and the abuses of those human rights need to be forefront in that conversation, considering what Modi is doing in Kashmir. He also makes the secondary point that, look, I understand that Pakistan is not without blame in this particular case of what is taking place with Kashmir. However, that doesn't excuse the human rights abuses. And any conversation that is taking place with Modi, especially from the standpoint of the President of the United States, needs to include human rights. Yes, that's what I expect my horse in this race to do. Tulsi also put out a message, but no, it didn't get into this notion of human rights. Welcome to the soapbox. Let's talk about it. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox, early morning soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, subscribe. Of course, you can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. I understand that in doing this video, there are going to be a lot of people who get mad at me, but nothing I say in this video is wrong. Nothing I say in this video is unfair. Clearly, I have not been one of those people that have attacked Tulsi all throughout this campaign. I like her, but my argument is candidates are people. They're not brands. And if you're going to like somebody, you got to like them warts and all. And I consider this to be a large wart. Howdy Modi event comes into play. 50,000 Indian Americans, attend this event, again, with all sorts of right-wingers, because Modi is a right-winger. And Donald Trump himself even gets together in this process. Now, it was suspected that Tulsi Gabbard was initially going to go to this event, and then it was said that she was pulling out of the event because of something that Ro Khanna said. And then it was like, well, no, it's not because of anything Ro Khanna said, which I don't necessarily buy anyway. It was more so because she had another arrangement that intersected this. I have to be honest, I less buy that particular part, but look, it's possible. It is very possible that she had something that was intersecting this particular event, which would have disallowed her from being able to attend. But it wouldn't shock me if initially she did want to attend, and that people either in her camp or people close to her flipped out and was like, you cannot run in the Democratic Party on the left and receive most of your support from the left and attend an event with Modi as a headliner. It would look bad, to say the least, not to mention it burns your supporters who've been pushing back on this notion that you are somehow attached to the hip with Modi. So it wouldn't shock me in the least if people flipped out about it, and when people flipped out about it, she pulled out and kind of saved face with this notion of, I had something else that intersected with this event. It wasn't because of anything Ro Khanna said. It wasn't because people flipped out. It had everything to do with, there was something, there was a prior engagement that stopped me from doing this. Now, in her saying that, she does say that I am going to meet with Modi, however, while he's here. Now, Sanders takes somewhat of a different tact on this and puts out a press release. If I could pull it up. Sanders' press release hits Modi and hits Trump for what is taking place in Kashmir and makes the point that, look, human rights needs to be a clear role. Bernie Sanders, as Trump meets with India's Modi, a reminder to put human rights at the center of U.S. foreign policy. I'm not going to read all of it, just a part of it. When President Trump meets with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Houston, we will hear much about the friendship between America and Indian peoples. However, there will be a definite silence when it comes to human rights crisis unfolding right before our eyes, and that is unacceptable. Modi's government unilaterally revoked Kashmir's long-standing autonomy, has cracked down on dissident, jailed political leaders, and instituted a communications blackout. The lockdown has also blocked Kashmir access to basic medical care. In a letter in the British Medical Journal on August 16th, a group of doctors from across India asked their government to ease restrictions on communications and travel, saying that there was a blatant denial of right to health care and the right to life, because they made it difficult for patients and staff to get to hospitals. A recent Human Rights Watch report noted that from chemotherapy to dialysis, patients are struggling to access life-saving treatment. President Trump has voiced no criticism of these troubling moves. He should be demanding that the restrictions be lifted and communications be restored immediately. And just the last part. To be clear, Pakistan has often played a bad role in Kashmir, but I believe the United States president must be clearly in support of international humanitarian law and in support of UN-backed peaceful resolution between India and Pakistan that respects the will of the Kashmiri people. Unfortunately, Trump has chosen to abandon the United States' global leadership role. He remains silent on the Kashmir crisis while planning to hold public rallies with the Indian Prime Minister. All right. He does two things. He makes the point that the rights abuses in Kashmir are unacceptable. By all measure, by any lefty, the rights abuses are unacceptable. That's not to say that you ignore the role that Pakistan plays in this, but it is an understanding that as a lefty, you should be able to look at something that's bad and call it bad. The revocation of the article that allowed that community, the only Muslim community that has any level of autonomy, up in smoke. The ferreting people out, meaning arresting people and shipping them out, calling them quote-unquote terrorists. Many of these people are just business leaders. Many of these people were just activists in that particular region. Gone. Out. Thousands. Getting rid of the press. Shutting down reporters. Shutting down journalists. And shutting down any notion of communication coming from that particular region. Meaning all sorts of human rights abuses can be taking place. And it seems that the goal of it is to squash any notion of that getting to the outside world. It looks bad. And you should be able to call bad, bad. Tulsi, for some reason, can't do that. And that's bothersome to me. And if she was running in a campaign as a right, on the right, there would be no issue here. But this is not a campaign on the right. This is a campaign on the left. And lefties have been bothered greatly by this. And by the way, we are consistent on this because we're bothered by human rights abuses across the board. And it's not a situation where, we're okay with Sanders meeting with Netanyahu. The issue is not whether these guys are meeting. The issue is whether or not human rights abuses can be called out as such. Take a listen to this. This is a video I did earlier. She's been asked about Kashmir.
That suppressed the voices of women, that made it. I met a woman a couple of days ago who said...
Let her finish. I mean, at some point she'll get to it, I'd imagine.
That suppressed the voices of women, that made it. I met a woman a couple of days ago who said that she...
Response. Listen for you.
In Kashmir, what is your personal idea as to how we deal with such a complex situation instead of painting it as a black and white issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, recognizing that it is complex. It is not as clear cut as this one side versus this one side. I think it's important as outsiders looking in to understand the complex history of Kashmir and what has happened to people there in the past, and how many families were driven from their homes there and fled and have not been able to return home. How the previous government had policies in place that made homosexuality illegal.
This was a question on Kashmir. I think this was, if I'm not mistaken, an 8-minute video, and I think it might have been 5 seconds of that video where human rights abuses came up. This is Tulsi's own video talking about the Modi visit. She did say, no, I'm not going to be able to meet him now, but in her own Twitter feed, she talked about being able to talk to him and meet him later while he's here. Let's take a listen.
Namaste. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Prime Minister Modi on his latest visit to the United States. And I'm sorry that I'm not able to join all of you there in person due to previously scheduled presidential campaign events in Iowa. But I'm really glad to see so many Indian Americans from all across our country, as well as many of my colleagues in Congress, coming together there. India is the world's largest democracy and one of the United States' most important partners in the Asia-Pacific region. Our two nations must continue to work closely together if we are to address the pressing issues that impact us and the world. Issues like combating climate change, preventing nuclear war and nuclear proliferation, and improving the economic well-being of our people. So as we build a strong and lasting partnership between our two nations, focusing on areas of economic growth, wealth and opportunity, inequality, science, health, the environment, security, and counterterrorism, we can bring about the ideal of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, recognizing that everyone on our planet, we are all one family. There is no place for hate or bigotry, ignorance, and prejudice. Let us work together to usher in a 21st century of aloha, respect, care, and love for others, no matter a race, religion, ethnicity, caste, economic status, or political affiliation.
You know what wasn't mentioned? Human rights. Never touched. Like I said in the last video on Kashmir, she didn't bring up human rights, or at the very least she brought it up in like a 5-second throwaway in a clip, in a, like a 10-minute clip. And in this particular case, she doesn't bring it up at all. She offers Modi a greeting and a welcome. That is not something any other campaign did, which draws a circle around Tulsi Gabbard doing it. Also, the fact that Sanders took his opportunity in order to slam Trump for taking this meeting and not bringing up human rights, again, that draws somewhat of a circle around it. How do you welcome Modi when Modi is doing all of these atrocious things in regards to, from the standpoint, again, from the perspective of the left? Also, it was this. I made the point that no lefty in their right mind would have, A, put this video out, and B, put this picture out. Modi is absolutely radioactive and toxic. And yet, aloha, welcome to the States. And human rights, in this case, for whatever reason to Tulsi Gabbard, in this particular scenario, doesn't matter. Or at the very least, is less important. I've had all sorts of people get angry at me for even mentioning this. There are two main problems here. One is that several. One, none of the other political campaigns gave Modi a welcome. Meaning for people who are saying that, no, Tulsi is not chained at the hip to Modi, or she doesn't have an association that goes beyond some of the other candidates. Well, clearly she does. Because no other candidate is out here sending out flyers like this, welcoming the guy that is responsible for current human rights abuses that are taking place in Kashmir. It's not that she wants to meet him. I hope you understand that. It's that she doesn't seem to process, or that the human rights abuses in Kashmir seems to matter to her less. That's the issue. I mean, people took issue saying, oh, wait, you're trying to freeze Modi out. No, again, it's not that we're trying to freeze Modi out. This is the issue of perspective. From the perspective of the left, Modi is radioactive. And yet, Tulsi seems to go out of her way to send greetings. None of the other political candidates are doing that. You guys may dislike me for saying this, but I'm pointing this out because this is somewhat of a big deal from the standpoint of the left. And there have been a lot of people who are supporters of Gabbard that have been flipping out over this one specific issue. I don't care whether she meets Modi. Don't care. My issue has more to do with whether or not the human rights abuses in Kashmir are forefront in her mind. I would say that whether we're talking about Netanyahu and the Palestinians and, let's say, my horse Sanders meeting Netanyahu, I would say that if there was any situation where there was some kind of human rights abuse and my candidate was engaging somebody on that front, I would want them to, at the very least, mention it, talk about it, care about it, bother them enough to where if the person is visiting the United States, that at the very least, you bring up the human rights abuses. I mean, I don't think I'm wrong or insane for saying that. And again, the issue is that this is on the left. That's the only issue. That's the only issue. Tulsi can be a Modi supporter. However, if Modi is committing atrocities in Kashmir, then she's to some degree stuck with that. I strongly suspect that the right approach, regardless of what your political affiliation is, regardless of what your identity is what Sanders did. Modi, welcome to the country. By the same token, Trump needs to bring up the human rights abuses that are taking place. From the standpoint of the left, this is consistent. This makes sense. This doesn't. I like Tulsi, warts and all. I accept that she has a certain political bias here. That doesn't stop me from liking her. That doesn't stop me from liking her. I guess my point is, if you're being consistent and you're on the left, regardless of what you think Pakistan is doing, regardless of what you think of Modi, you have to, at the very least, accept that from the standpoint of the left, this guy is radioactive. And the last thing in the world, especially having some level of political awareness, is that you don't do this. You don't do that. All right. Like, share, subscribe. I know I'm going to get a lot of downvotes. But before you do the downvote thing, at the very least, you should be able to, like oftentimes what I get is justification. Oh, we want to meet world leaders. That's not really the issue though, right? I mean, if Bernie Sanders was president of the United States, Bernie Sanders would have to work with Modi. By the same token, I think Bernie Sanders would bring up human rights. I don't have that strong feel for Tulsi. I mean, in a sense. And again, the issue is that this is on the left, not so much as an absolute. Meaning you can have all sorts of feelings about Modi based on your own political leanings. You can think Modi is the greatest thing on the planet. That's irrelevant. We're talking about from the standpoint of the left and the way we look at our politics and the way we process the world. And in the way that we process the world, Modi is radioactive. This makes sense. This video, not mentioning human rights, does not. And just before I end this, this was the video I did earlier. She was asked about Kashmir once before. And just like the new campaign video where she's welcoming Modi, in this, again, throwaway. Can I just point out that we haven't heard anything about human rights abuses at this point?
That made it, I met a woman.
But let's let her finish. I mean, at some point she'll get to it, I'd imagine.
That suppressed the voices of women. That made it, I met a woman a couple of days ago who said that she, as a Kashmiri woman, had no rights to own property there in her homeland. So these changes are things that are...
1 minute. Nothing about human rights abuses. In fact, it's been essentially an apology tour.
Must be worked out. violations happening in a sovereign country.
The entire thing has been an apology tour for.
They're very difficult. There are concerns that should be addressed about human rights violations and civil rights violations. But overall, I think this is a situation, again, in a sovereign country that must be worked out by all sides.
10-minute video, maybe 2 minutes. I mean, what, like maybe 30 seconds left in that video? Human rights, from the standpoint of Kashmir, is a throwaway. It seems like Tulsi Gabbard is against intervention, except in the sense of Kashmir. And, I don't think I'm wrong in pointing this out. This is somewhat of a problem. And I like Gabbard, especially now. I mean, we're in a situation where Trump is literally at the precipice of a war with Iran, and Gabbard's voice is one of the strongest in the world in pushing back on this narrative of Trump, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. She's been tremendous on this, especially on the standpoint of Fox News. So this is not a blanket dislike or anything else. This is very specific in the sense of I don't particularly like the way that she gives the human rights stuff a pass on issues of Kashmir. And in multiple occasions, she seemed to do just that. Shout out to Sanders for being aware of the Kashmir issue and raising that issue when Modi is coming to the country. She wants to have some sort of relationship with India. We have a relationship with India. We have a relationship with India now. That's irrelevant. I'm talking about the very specific politics of what is taking place on the left, how the left regards Modi, and the fact that Modi is in the country. Sanders hits Modi and slams Trump for his association with Modi and not bringing up human rights. I suppose I'm stuck in the case of slamming Gabbard for not bringing up the case of human rights in a similar sense. And just making the case that from the standpoint of the left, Modi is radioactive. And she, whether she was going to attend that particular event or not, again, I honestly think she probably was going to attend it and people flipped out and she pulled back. Whatever her rationale for not attending that particular event, good. You didn't attend the event. By the same token, your position is clear. And the conversations, again, about the Kashmir in the other video, human rights was a throwaway. So, if you like her warts and all, don't make excuses. I'll leave it at that. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.